one of the images that I use often now is from The Princess Bride. And there's a point where they get to what is known as the fire swamp. And the fire swamp is this scary place that has a reputation for killing people. And so they're hesitant to step in, as you can imagine. But what they determine is it's better to risk and step into the fiery swamp. And there are dangers there, but the more they move into it, the more they understand the dangers, and they actually can create safety in the midst of those dangers. For many of us, these stories, these experiences, and these emotions feel like stepping into the fiery swamp. And one of the keys is you don't go alone. You do have community. You do have a therapist that helps you move through it. And you also have the hope of getting to the other side. For a lot of people, the concern is if I begin to feel this, it will consume me. I won't be able to make my way out. Right. And what we discover is we can find our way out of the fiery swamp to the other side.
Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. I'm Randy Evert, your co-host, and we are here today to offer you a legacy presentation featuring Dr. Mark Laaser. Mark is going to be talking with me today about embracing your story. This is a fascinating podcast that we're sure that you will enjoy, and we invite you to now watch as Dr. Mark Laaser addresses embracing your story.
We are delighted, Randy, I think is the word.
Delighted might be an understatement. We have been trying for months to get today's guest here in studio with us, and we're excited to have Dr. Greg Miller, the director of men's workshops, among other things, for Faithful and True. And Greg is in studio with us this morning. Good morning, Greg.
Good morning. I'm glad to be here, having flown in from Chicago
Yes,
this morning.
we've spared no expense,
to
import our guest in studio this morning.
Oh, the sky's the limit.
The sky is the limit. But we've got a very important topic to talk about, and Greg and I have kind of agreed that he's going to talk with us this morning about one of the topics that we cover at the workshop, and that topic is embracing your story. And Greg, I have been impressed over the years by how you've grown in your teaching, and this teaching, I think, is a part of your own journey and part of your own experience. And why don't you just launch us in and tell us a little bit about what embracing your story is all about, and then we'll gradually discuss 4 or 5 points that you have about that.
Okay. For those people who have been to the workshops, they know that an important principle is this idea of looking at your own story and understanding your story. And I know that for a lot of people, there's kind of a thought of, why do we have to look at the past? Can't we just look forward? Can't we just embrace what is next? But one of the things that we do believe is that we are defined and shaped by the experiences that we've had. And one of the ways that we can move forward is by looking at the particulars of our story and the way that it unfolds and the way that it affects how we make our choices now.
I think you've just identified, one of the classic fears, I think, that we run up against, that a lot of people are kind of afraid of their story. They're afraid of the pain or afraid of the feelings that might come up, so they resist at points talking about it. I think one of the great things about the workshop is that it helps the guys feel safe to talk about their story for the first time. So I think one of your first points is it not is exactly that right. And I also think that the average Christian wants to forgive and forget, wants to honor parents, wants to not to get into being a victim and stuff like that. So they tend to always want to look forward. They always want to look to the easier solutions. And like M. Scott Peck said many years ago, to embrace your story is the road less traveled, isn't it?
Absolutely. And one of the things that we emphasize is that we don't talk about our story or look at our story for the purpose of blaming. That blame doesn't serve anyone. In fact, blame causes us to become a victim of our story, and we end up being powerless. But we look at the story for understanding. And you kind of alluded to this. A lot of people, and this is kind of the first place where a lot of people are, is they are denying their story. And there may be parts of their story that they don't want to acknowledge. There may be parts of their story that they minimize or avoid telling. But we recognize that in really to move forward, we have to move from denying our story to begin telling our story.
I think there's also the possibility, don't you think, that people have not fully always remembered their story, right? I mean, there are maybe painful experiences and incidents that, since they happened, they have been working on covering up, medicating. One of the important points that I think we're trying to make this morning is that, any addiction, not just sexual addiction, but any addiction is a coping that we all do to medicate the pain that our story can represent.
And I think that for a lot of the men that we work with and the people that they're in a relationship with, they are shocked when the truth comes out, and it's almost as if they had this secret life, and they had these two persons, and one was in the light, one was the public persona that everyone saw, that everyone knew, and then they had this secret life that they were able to keep hidden. And that's part of the denying of our story, is not looking at all of it, but to be able to say what is true is both the hidden and the secretive, and also the public and what I want other people to know about me.
Yeah, so it's incredibly important, don't you think, then, that if we've been using a variety of behaviors and perhaps substances to, medicate our story, that and to as a form of denial of our story, to live those separate lives, that it's really important to get sobriety from whatever the addiction is, so that we can start looking at this, don't you think?
Absolutely. And one of the images that was helpful for me is even in my own life, it was like I had this house that I would invite people into, but there was this secret space in the back that nobody knew about.
Right.
And it was built into the framework of the house, so from the outside you couldn't even see that it existed.
Right.
And then eventually it was exposed, and others could see what was in there and was hidden.
Yeah.
And it was at that point that I could no longer deny the story.
Right. I'm just aware here for a moment that you mentioned earlier, some of our listeners are alumni that have been to the workshop, and they kind of understand a little bit more about the process, about how we hopefully make it safe for people to start telling their story. But could you speak for just a minute to those many, many listeners that we have that haven't been to a workshop, don't have the means to get to a workshop? What would you say to them about finding some kind of safety to start getting into this?
Well, one of the things I just want to affirm is that it takes incredible courage to even begin thinking about telling your story.
Right.
And part of it is finding that safe community. And I think a great thing that we recommend is that you test the waters. That instead of just leading out with all of your story, you can in increments, test and see how people respond.
Right.
And I use the example, if you're at a men's Bible study and you just want to put out there that you're going through a difficult time, and the person that you're speaking with immediately starts talking about the weather or a football game, that's a good indication that they're not going to be a good steward of your story.
That's right.
And I think of the scripture about throwing the pearls before swine. And one of the things I recognize is if we really value our story, then we will see it as sacred. And, one of the things about the scripture is the pigs were just being pigs.
Right.
And it's our responsibility to be wise and steward our story and be cautious with whom we share it.
Yeah, so testing the waters means finding safe people. And I think what would be a healthier response? So you're saying, I'm not having a good week. I'm going through some tough stuff. What might you look for in terms of how a person would be a safer person?
Well, I know something that would be safe for me is if the person is able to respond, I get that. I've gone through some difficult times. And in some way, they begin to bring their story because one of the things that creates the most safety is when there's reciprocity, when there's mutual sharing. And so for someone to say, I get difficult times and I've gone through those, or my marriage has been in challenging places, then immediately I start to believe this guy gets it. And I will feel safer to share more about what's going on.
Yeah, and I think the average person at a Bible study, you mentioned Bible study, and by the way, we're not trying to compare Bible studies to pig pens here necessarily. But on the other hand, I do think that one of the great things that happens if we are willing to tell our story is that it will also help other people feel safe to start telling theirs.
Absolutely. And one of the principles of the workshop is that those who teach do tell their story,
Right.
because we want to model that and help to create safety initially.
That's right. So let's assume that a person has found a safe place or a safe person to start telling their story. What do you think is the next step of this journey?
Well, I think what happens is when we begin to tell our story, it's almost as if we are a reporter talking about somebody else's experiences. We are telling the details, or we're telling the facts, but at this point, it still seems like it's a narrative about somebody else's life.
Right.
And the next step after we begin to tell it is that we begin to own our story. And what I mean by that is it goes from being something that we're reporting on the news to the reality of this is about me. These are my experiences. These are the things that shaped me. And for a lot of people, I think that can be an awakening, where we begin to realize that these experiences did shape me and form me in such a way that they do inform the way that I make choices now. So I'm no longer just talking about someone else's hurt or sadness or abuse or abandonment. I'm now beginning to recognize that this is something that happened to me. And one of the things that is just, I think, a principle is the more vulnerable we become, the more important it is that we feel safe. That the people that we are sharing with can create that safety by embracing us, not judging us. I think one of the things that causes a lack of safety most is when we feel like we're being judged. I know that for me, if I'm sharing my story and I feel like I'm being judged in that, then immediately it doesn't feel safe.
Right.
Greg, that's a point that Mark made on a previous show. Mark was talking about the first time that he found an accountability group in treatment, in which you went in with all of this shame and apprehension, and rather than starting with him telling his story, they went around the room and shared theirs. And when Mark told his story, they applauded. And all of a sudden, there was this sense of, I'm being accepted. And after hearing the stories of everyone else, he felt safe to share his story.
Continue on. I know you've got another couple of points to talk to us about this idea of embracing the story.
Yeah, and again, I do see it as a progression where most of us can start out at least at some level denying a part of our story. And then we find that safe place, we find that safe community that makes it possible for us to begin to tell our story. And at that point, it is just a narrative. It's like we're a reporter telling somebody else about the weather or an event. But then eventually we begin to let the truth sink into us and we start to own our story. This is no longer about a distant person. This is about me and my experiences. And that leads to the next thing. When we allow ourselves to own our story, a very natural response is we begin to feel our story. And this becomes, I think, a pretty overwhelming experience for people because they can feel overwhelmed by the grief, the sadness, the fear, whatever it is that historically they've worked to deny those emotions. When they begin to own their story, they begin to feel it.
Right. And that's where community becomes safe too, because a safe community will not react to the tears that might show up or the sadness or perhaps even anger. An unsafe community will try to talk you out of that right away, won't they? But a safer community will encourage or simply listen and not judge, but just be there, willing to help that person move through that, right?
Absolutely. And I kind of use the image from my own life of how I had this house, and in the back of the house was this secret room that I kept hidden, and in there were experiences and stories and beliefs. And as I found the place to the community where I could begin to explore that, I discovered the emotions that were associated with those things. And that was a difficult part of it, and it was important to have a therapist, to have community that could just be with me in that. And they didn't feel a rush to fix it. They didn't feel a rush to deny it. They just let me be in it and move through it. One of the images that I use often now is from a movie, and the movie's The Princess Bride, and there's a point where they get to what is known as the fire swamp. And the fire swamp is this scary place that has a reputation for killing people, and so they're hesitant to step in, as you can imagine. But what they determine is it's better to risk and step into the fiery swamp. And there are dangers there, but the more they move into it, the more they understand the dangers, and they actually can create safety in the midst of those dangers. For many of us, these stories, these experiences, and these emotions feel like stepping into the fiery swamp. Mm-hmm. And one of the keys is you don't go alone. You do have community. You do have a therapist that helps you move through it. And you also have the hope of getting to the other side. For a lot of people, the concern is if I begin to feel this, it will consume me. I won't be able to make my way out. Right. And what we discover is we can find our way out of the fiery swamp to the other side.
You know, one of the images that I've always thought about when we come to this point about, entering into the story. I have that image of the Jews standing on the banks of the Red Sea, and they were looking at this expanse of water. They heard the hoofbeats of the chariots, and they knew they needed to get to the other side, but they were afraid of drowning, right? Mm-hmm. And the reason I bring this up is that I remember my therapist at the time saying, if you'll start, you may find that, this is not going to consume you, that your tears will eventually end, that you're not going to get so angry that you're going to go out and kill someone, and let us be your companions on this journey. Let us walk with you on this journey. And strangely enough, I think that if we do trust in God, He will, in some way, if you look at this metaphorically, He will part the waters for you. And the water can be the sea of tears that you may need to shed to get through some of this pain.
And one of the things that I find encouraging is the idea that I don't have to be here forever, that I can move through this to the other side. And one of the things for those people who are in recovery themselves from addiction, to me, this is the place where many people get stuck in their recovery. Mm-hmm. Because if I don't get in there and try to understand what it is that is driving the addiction and why I'm medicating and what it is I'm trying to avoid, I will eventually want to go back to it. But if I can get free of the pain, the sadness, the grief, then I'm less likely to need my medication. And one other thing that I would add is that a lot of times we do talk about the pain and the grief, but we also begin to discover that there is joy, there is a funness to our memories. There's a guy that I work with that has great memories of playing swords with friends, and it brings joy and excitement. Mm-hmm. And so that is also true, that, I know in my back room where all these secrets were, there was also the other emotions that I had worked so hard to numb. And when I allowed myself to begin to feel the grief and the sadness, I began to feel joy and peace. Mm-hmm. And in the early days of my recovery, what was foundational, or what I felt most of the time, was both grief and gratitude. I was so sad by the choices I had made, the consequences of that, the people I had hurt, the people I had betrayed. And I was so grateful for the work that was being done in my life. I often say I was so sad that I was 45 when I entered recovery, and I was so thankful I wasn't 46.
That's a great way to look at it. So you're kind of introducing us to this concept that we teach here called the ampersand, meaning that it's not a black and white world, really, is it? And our histories are not black and white. And our story is not black and white, that it was all bad. I mean, I think sometimes people think if I start getting into all this stuff, I came from a bad family, a bad neighborhood, a bad this or that. And I think you're reminding us that when we start embracing our story, remembering the stories, there's positive feelings and positive memories and positive experiences too.
Absolutely. And the final thing is the idea of we do integrate all of our stories. So we begin with denying our story, so there are parts that we don't want to look at, but eventually we have the courage to embrace all of it. And I do embrace the and-ness of me, that I am the beloved Son of God, and I hurt others in my addiction. All of that can be true. And it's important for those of you who are in relationship with people who do struggle with addiction, is that you're also on the journey embracing all of who that person is, and we begin by embracing the truth of all of who we are. That for all of us, there is darkness and light. For all of us, there is a need for the ampersand to embrace the truth of who we are.
I think you've just introduced us to a totally new word, andedness. I don't know why, but I like it. But I think there's another thing you're talking about here, and we're also all about helping couples recover from addiction here. And one of the things that I think is so important in what you just said, because I think a lot of spouses out there are wondering how can I support the addict that I live with in his journey, what I heard you say there is that the best way to support him would be to, like we say, own your story. Mm-hmm. Now, you may not have the same kind of level of pain that you have been, medicating with a primary addiction, but you may have some both good parts of your story and some painful parts of your story, and you may recognize that you've coped with those in such a way that you've not wanted to look at your story either, but to be a companion on the journey through the fire or the swamp or whatever. I mean, I think that's one of the best things any partner can do.
Absolutely. And, we talked at one point about how do you find that safe community? Well, what I've discovered is the people who can steward my story best are those people who steward their own story best.
Right.
And they've done their work. They've moved from denial to integrating all the parts of their story, and so they can be people of truth and grace. They can be people of challenge, and that creates the safety because you understand they get their story, so you can begin to believe they will get your story.
Yeah. One of the other parts about the ampersand here, I think you were introducing us to, is that as we embrace the painful parts of our stories, we may also realize, and God has perhaps developed in us some strengths, some qualities even of our character that might be stronger because of the pain that we've lived through. Mm-hmm. I think about that for myself. I think even the fact that I'm involved in this field is because of my story. I don't think I'd be able to sit in rooms, whether it's groups or with individuals, and be empathetic if it weren't for the fact that I had my own story. I could go on with that, but don't you think that continually one of the things we're after is helping people understand how they can grow and be stronger people because of their story?
Absolutely. It's kind of the idea of some of the best parts of who I am came from the most difficult, dark, painful experiences of my life. Mm-hmm. And what is also true, the chaos that experienced. There were so many years that I lived out of that chaos, which meant I made chaotic choices, which meant I hurt other people. Mm-hmm. But again, if I can even steward the chaos, that's where I can find new life.
That's an interesting expression you just said, steward the chaos. That may be a subject of another show, Randy.
I believe that I'm busy trademarking andedness as we speak. I am moved by the impact of today's show and having Greg here as our guest. It strikes me that men who are out there listening, who have been contemplating coming to our men's intensive workshops, might be so motivated now hearing you and Mark, who are our two leaders and facilitators of every men's workshop at Faithful and True, to take a closer look on our website, faithfulandtrue.com, and truly start to get serious about embracing your story. We really want to thank Greg for flying in from Chicago today and taking part on today's show. It's been our pleasure. We look forward to having you come back on at another time and do this again.
Well, thanks. It's been great being here.
Mark, any closing comments from you?
Well, it's a blessing for me to be able to work with Greg, teach with Greg. Greg has taught me so many things, including aspects of what we've been talking about today. So, Greg, you're a blessing in my life, and you're a blessing in my story. You're one of the good parts of my story over the last 5 years.
Thank you for joining us today on the Faithful and True podcast. We hope that Dr. Laaser's message has been impactful for you and beneficial as you are along the way of your healing journey. We also invite you to visit our website, faithfulandtrue.com. LMFT.com, where you'll find many resources. You'll find our online bookstore. You'll find the information and online registration possibilities for our 3-day intensive workshops. We offer the Men's Journey Workshop every month here at Faithful and True. And then on a quarterly basis, we offer the Women's Journey Workshop for the spouses. We also have 2 different versions of our Couples Journey Workshops. We invite you to read about those events and to call our office to register for either one of those couples events. In the meantime, we hope that this coming week will be a week for you that's filled with many blessings and with great vision.